Welcome to Pushing Forward with Alycia, a podcast that gives disability a voice. Each week, we will explore topics like confidence, ambition, resilience, and finding success against all odds. We are creating a collective community that believes that all things are possible for all people. Open hearts, clear paths, let's go.
Welcome back to Pushing Forward with Alycia. This is the podcast where we celebrate disability inclusion, and we are celebrating the season of Disability Pride Month. And boy, do I have a guest that's going to be able to lift that up for us. Joining me today is Jonathan Kaufman. He is a business strategist. He's a licensed psychotherapist. He's an executive coach. He's a powerhouse thought leader. He's everywhere consistently in disability advocacy. He was born with cerebral palsy, and he's breaking boundaries and advocating and making space for all of us. He does extraordinary work. He's also an adventurer. He's hiked the Ecuadorian highlands. He's skied down mountains. He's rappelled cliffs. Wow. And he's been named top 50 global thought leader in diversity and inclusion and mental health by Thinkers 360 for 3 years running. Thank you for joining the show.
I appreciate you having me, truly.
It's exciting to meet you.
Yeah.
Let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
You've lived your entire life with cerebral palsy, so you've got the lived experience of disability lifelong, just like me. Can you take us back to the early moments and how that has shaped you into the space that you're in this world? Can we look back a little bit?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of sort of real moments that shifted the way I look at disability. I was brought up understanding I have a right hemiparesis, a form of cerebral palsy. So obviously that's sort of the medical definition. I have a father who is a practicing physician and professor of medicine at Yale. So growing up, we would have these sort of arguments from the medical model and the social model continuously.
Oh,
Yeah, it was really, it's still to this day, it's still fascinating. But I think it's 50, there were sort of various moments. The sort of first moments is my dad was raised in Brooklyn and lived around the corner from Judy Huemann. So I knew Judy a long time. And actually, we would never talk about disability per se. She'd always ask about my dating life, my sex life, anything, but that was here nor there. When I realized this is a world that I was interested in, not just from the perspective of the lived experience, but I was interested in it from an academic world. I was training as a social scientist, whatever that meant. There wasn't such a thing as disability studies when I was going to school, so I had to make it up. And then I went to college at Oxford University. So I went abroad, which gave me a completely different perspective of disability globally. I also was in a college that was built in 1612. So it wasn't exactly the most accessible place you could be, but you figure it out. I am old enough that I was right around the start of the ADA. That's when I was coming into being, and my consciousness was raised at that point. Came back to the States, said, what do I want to do? And went to graduate school, went to the University of Chicago and was studying human development, public policy, this combination of things. And I was being trained as a psychotherapist. I was studying sociology, anthropology. Two people shifted everything. One was the future president of the United States, Barack Obama, and I was on a medical ethics committee with Michelle for many years. I was in Chicago for about 6.5 years. And the other was a guy by the name of Michael Csikszentmihalyi, who was a professor. He was the founder of positive psychology. He wrote this famous book called Flow.
can we break that down, though? Let's stop for a minute. Okay, you just dropped the Obamas very casually. So let's talk about that a little bit. He was one of the moments that shifted. Like, what happened?
But yeah, okay, so I was at the School of Public Policy at the time, and he was teaching a class on diversity and inclusion at the law. He was a law professor. So I was interested in that. And so I went. And so I had a lot of friends who knew him, were at the law school. And then I went back to New York because I went to Columbia University to do my MPhil and PhD work in applied anthropology. And I was interested in the culture of work through a disability lens. That's the world that I was really interested in, and studying businesses and studying organizations and how they work. And this has led me to what I do now, or a lot of what I do now. And so friends of mine were like, he's running for president of the United States. Do you want to hop on board? I was like, yeah, but I was moving to Los Angeles at the time. I lived in LA for a few years and I was flying back and forth. Eventually he won. And I was do some advisory work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then also had a portfolio of working with several different U.S. Department of Labor, Veterans Affairs, various other things within the administration, but I wasn't there full time. And when I left, I was like, okay, what do I want to do with my life? I knew I didn't want to go into academic, so I started a consulting firm. I started a consulting practice, and my interest was really looking at the intersection of business, disability, innovation, leadership, mental health, and culture. That's the sort of space that I inhabit. And as I said to you right before we got on, there's a saying that anthropologists have: we are the professional strangers. And very much so in similar ways, as a psychotherapist, which I continue to practice, you are the professional stranger in terms of understanding sort of the inner workings of how people think. And that's much so in the same way how organizations run. So I've had these organizational perspective from the anthropology perspective, as well as sort of the life of the mind, how it works. And coming at it from that standpoint really gave me a unique point of view. So I ended up starting this business. And I said, look, the fact of the matter is I have to create my own world. I have to create my own opportunities. People with disabilities, the world is not made for us. So I have to say, okay. And what was really important for me is like, I'm one person with a disability. And I met John Kemp, who's a very famous disability civil rights leader when I was a teenager. He always used to say, when you meet one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. And having the experiences I've had, both as a clinician, as a social scientist, you realize that's the case. And that disability is, to me, it's the essence of diversity. It really is. It runs across race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomics, sexual orientation, religion. And what's fascinating is that what we're seeing is if you're lucky enough to age, and most of us age, this is a community we all join. So it's inclusive by definition. And the fact of the matter is, I often tell people who are aging, I said, welcome to my community. This is something that's to be inclusive. And the idea of the notion of accessibility, when you think about the notion of how you navigate this notion of disability in our lives, this should be something that's seen as not commonplace, but a natural progression. And that disability is part of the human experience. It's not separate from. And it weaves itself into the natural order of things. And that's why I think understanding disability is so important. And that for businesses, it isn't about a cost center. This is about creativity. This is about innovation. This is about design. And the fact of the matter is, that's what's been really fascinating to me. And being able to create my own life around this, have the sort of diverse experiences that I continue to have, has been phenomenal.
I love everything that you just said. And that whole progression of being a human and disability being a part of that is so true.
Mm-hmm.
And you witnessed this life from Judy Huemann to Barack Obama to going to all these amazing schools, experiencing accessibility around the world. Why is it so difficult for us to understand this? Why in the heck is it so difficult? What are you finding? Like specifically in this like search of finding the connection of disability and business and like culture, like what's going on?
I mean, what's going on is it's always interesting. So there was a wonderful book by a French author named Henri Stryker. He wrote it, I'd say 30 years ago. It's called The History of Disability. And it was in French. I had to find it in English. My French wasn't that good. but I found it about 15 years ago, read it, and what's fascinating when you look at the history of disability, it was always a sense of othering. And that othering, and so he traces disability 2000, about 2,500 years, back to biblical times, through the Greeks, and really around Western civilization. Now, this is just Western civilization what we're talking about, because I can go beyond that, but let's start there. There has been a sense of othering that has
Yeah.
been a natural part. If you look at even within the last, let's say, 100 years, 150 years to be exact, you have the ugly laws, for example, and how they created this barrier. And ultimately, what it comes down to is the F word, fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of othering. And what that often does is either this is something that's different, that's not quote unquote normal or other, or you have people who are, this could happen to me. And if it happens to me, will there be a problem? Now, the problem isn't the person. The problem is society. The problem is that, oh, we're not designing, we're not creating a culture that really leans into this type of society. Now, the good thing is, positive thing that what we're noticing is we're having a global aging population. And what that says to me, in this global aging population, from an economic standpoint, you have a lot of people with a lot of money who are disposable income, global. Now they recognize, wait a minute, if the world is not made for us, then we have to do something about it. And thankfully, there's this convergence of technology in terms of where it's going, and particularly in the world of AI and portable computing in a variety of capacities. It's gaining enormous traction, the ability to see architecture in new ways. When curb cuts, for example, is one thing. I tell people all the time, when I speak to people, or whether it's when I'm teaching or whether I'm giving a lecture or wherever it may be, how many of you text? And everyone raises their hand or said, do you know where that started? And people are like, no. It started at Gallaudet University in 1976 for the deaf community. So if you look at technology and where it's emanated from, the provost of MIT told me, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, he's like, anecdotally speaking, about 67% of our student body is somewhere on the autism spectrum. Wow. So if you think about it just from those two data points, you realize that technology in itself has always been a necessity. And we collectively in the disability community have had to create anew, because it had to be. It was part of our DNA. We had to continue to evolve and create. I always think about it when I'm walking down the street in New York, which is where I live, and saying, okay, I got to go to the subway. I have to think 10 steps ahead, because it's, okay, am I spastic today? Am I tight today? It depends on the get. Obviously in the East Coast, we have seasons. So it's snowing, is it not snowing? But what that also does is it informs the fact that people with disabilities are great strategists by the mere nature of their lived experience. We're always constantly thinking and strategizing. And I've noticed that and say, how can you take that knowledge and that skill set and modify it in different ways?
I love what you just said, and I wrote it down because I love it. Disability, we've always had to create anew. Like disabled people always had to create anew. It's so true. That is such a really beautiful way to say it. And we're forced to.
Mm-hmm. I wrote for Forbes for 4.5 years. I wrote a series of columns called Mindset Matters. And during that time, it evolved, and I recognized disability is a language of innovation. It truly is. That lived experience is a language of innovation. And I also think it's an art. The way in which we live, those of us who live with disabilities, yes, art can be heart-wrenching, it can be awful, but it can be beautiful. And it is that spectrum that we live. But it's important to understand that and to have some perspective on that so that when I'm looking at this and saying, wait a minute, how do people with disabilities reclaim power? It's how we perceive disability that's going to become the way forward. We have to say, how do we reclaim our understanding of that power dynamic? And that's where I'm writing about. And I think for the first time, in part, in a large part due to social media, is that there is this access in which the proverbial we, can communicate to each other, to other people, and really pull down those walls, that artifice that's there of the unknown, and say, hey, these are people who enjoy everything just like you and me. This is part of the human experience. That's all it is. Simple as that.
Totally love it. And that's very interesting.
Yeah, I write all the time. So it's like everyone has said to me, why aren't you writing a book? Why aren't you writing a book? And I've been hesitant about it. I'm like, why? Why should I fear it? I write constantly anyways. And I have been writing as far back as I can remember, and I love it. So yeah, it's in process.
I feel like that's a very natural fit for you.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just putting stuff that I've already written before and reworking it. And then also new stuff and new ideas.
So, as a psychotherapist
Yeah.
and a business strategist,
Yeah.
how do you see the intersection of mental health? I know mental health is a big piece of your platform,
Yeah.
and disability showing up in leadership and in workplace culture.
I think several things. One, when you're always looking at leadership, I think the idea of leadership has changed over the past, I'd say, 30 to 40 years. But there's been this top-down approach. And now we're in this new phase of understanding radical honesty. And radical honesty is one way of thinking about it. And also psychological safety. If the world of work is changing, the culture of work is changing, the idea of having a 9 to 5 job is going the way of the dodo. The fact of the matter is, we are in this digital world where people can do remote work, which opens up a cadre of possibilities for people with disabilities. And yes, there is pushback in these days, but I do think if you want to get the best and the brightest and you want to retain the best and the brightest, you have to be flexible. In that flexibility, what does that mean as far as mental health is concerned and well-being? That's essential. And that is part of that's part of the umbrella of disability is mental health. It often sometimes, if we look at a disability as a caste system, it's often sometimes on the lower end and it really shouldn't. We all deal with mental stresses and well-being all the time, but that shouldn't be seen as something that's a negative per se. It's okay, we have to navigate life. There are situational aspects that come up.
Real quick, what you just said too is how mental health is on the bottom, like of the list typically of disability initiatives and like all these things that are up at top of mind.
Yeah.
I read something the other day that accessibility and accommodation requests from a mental health standpoint, those are some of the top most requested from an accommodation standpoint. So have you heard that?
I've heard it and I write about it consistently because when I go into companies, one of the questions that's always is, okay, accommodations is one thing. It's not just the physical nature of accommodations or being able to saying, okay, what if you need a break? What is it about well-being? How do we structure a work day so that you can get the most productivity out of this individual? And that is part and parcel to mental health. What does that mean in terms of quality of work and quality of life?
Yeah.
If you don't have one, you cannot have the other. And so
Yeah.
it's really critical to say, okay, what are the mechanics? And a lot of the stuff that I work on with individuals, whether that's executive coaching or organizations is how to develop those mechanics around that. What does that actually mean? And how does that work fit within our corporate culture or with me as an individual saying, okay, here's the situation. Here's what my needs are. Everyone has to be their own best self-advocate because no one knows themselves better than themselves. And you say, how can I self-advocate? That's something that I think for me, in my line of work, I can see doing that and working on that as something that's critical piece, actually a cornerstone piece, is self-advocacy. Because what happens is, particularly in the disability community, which oftentimes is not talked about, but it's beginning to, there's some light being shed on it, is internalized ableism. You know, I certainly grew up with it.
Me too.
I know stuff. I was like, I don't want to be seen as that when people around me. Then I sort of said, screw it. You know, who I am. If people don't like me, goodbye. And I was very fortunate to have really loving parents who gave me that confidence to say, they're not worth it. Oh, I'm still working on it.
And you know what? I love your kind of thinking about self-advocacy as a big part of your platform because especially in business and in work environment, I'm just the same as you. I had 20 years in a corporate position and made it to executive level and had a really successful career doing that. But I never wanted to be the one to self-advocate and to ask and to say. And I think like overcoming that internalism at work is really hard as an individual to just have to go in and do the whole hustle and do what everybody else is doing and then be brave or bold or daring or just be you to say what you need. Like that's really, 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 really hard. Even if you feel like you're somewhat settled with your disability, you know, it's hard.
Listen, I work with CEOs and I work with high-level executives, and I have to tell you, sometimes they are terrified. And even so, I do a lot of role play. They said, what if? What's the worst thing that can happen? They say no.
Yeah.
Okay. And what if they did say no? Are you any different than you were 2 minutes ago? No.
Yeah.
You say, all right, so now I've gotten it. I've received it. That information, it may feel like a gut punch at times, but now one door closes, another opens. I hate to use that sort of old terminology, but there is some truth to that.
Yeah,
And you have to be able, and being able to adapt. And for people with disabilities in terms of their lives, they've had to be advocates in other ways. And sometimes that's not as explicit, but implicit in the sense that I don't even know that I'm advocating for myself, but I am. But it's recognizing that and what are the tools that one needs so that they can move forward. And those are challenges. And I will be the first to say to anybody, I'm still a work in progress.
Yeah. Me too. Probably lifelong.
I always think it's lifelong.
Yeah. Okay, so you're talking a lot about your business. I want to give you space on this show to talk about through a broader lens, your consulting, what you are bringing to the table for, you know, your company and your career and how you're helping a lot of organizations. Like, what is it that you do?
Yeah, this is the question my wife always asks. She has something in her, I swear to God. She's like, I have to tell people what you do it. I'm not really sure what it is. I say to people, look, and I've said this before, I work at these intersections, but what people hire me to actually do is to think for a living, and not only to think for a living, to say, what are the outcomes we want? So whether it's as an executive coach or particularly, it's like, okay, I want to work through particular issues. Help me do that so that one, we can deal with specific problems. A lot of people are coming to me and say, what's the disability economy? What's the longevity economy? How do we deal with that? That's the external pieces of, okay, because we realize this is a market that we can't afford to leave out. Secondly, there's the other thing, the internal pieces. How do we work in terms of workforce issues? And it isn't just about There are a lot of people who do hires. I do what is called corporate ethnography. I embed myself with an organization to truly understand the culture in which they live. It's not a turnkey. It's really about developing what one would say alliances. The alliance is me and them and finding the best solution. Because ultimately, these organizations are experts at what they do. So it's how do you bring that expertise together so that you can have the best outcome? And whether that is through a consultative process, whether that's through an executive coaching process, it is. I've never done the same thing twice, even if it may be for the same industry, because it's different people, it's different organizations, they're different needs. Because ultimately, what I'm here to do is I am in the helping profession. That's essentially what I do. And when I get down to the essence of it, whether it's dealing with sort of corporate issues, whether it's dealing with organizational issues within, whether it's dealing with teams, ERGs, or just how teams work to, okay, let's see how to structure this business as we enter these new marketplaces. What can we do? That's really it. And then from a psychotherapeutic point of view or coaching, that's more tradition. My clients, they're dealing, it's mostly executives, people who are white collar. I have economists, lawyers, doctors, but then there are people who have become disabled in their lives or aging and saying, okay, how do I deal with change? This new identity that I now, whether I like it or not, have to wield, have to wear, and have to understand, and how to deal with the pain, struggle, sadness, but also the joy of I'm still alive.
Yeah.
Stuff I can do, but it's getting over that hump. There are many things. I have the beauty of, again, and I go back to this notion of being the professional stranger in some ways, because I have this ability to see the world in very different ways. And I am industry agnostic. So I work with a variety of different companies, a variety of different industries, and excited to do. Bob Dylan had a line that said, I'll know my song well before I start singing. And it was really important for me in this space of disability. Yeah, I was born, but this is my disability. It's not everyone else's. So I sort of said, okay, I went into academics to really study and understand it and think about it. But I was interested in how do you apply it, not just theoretical, just to take this knowledge and apply it in real ways. And so that it benefits the organizations or the individuals that I work. I think that's the best way I could say that I work, because it is different. It's in a consultative manner. So when people come to work with me, it's okay, you have to recognize this is in many ways, some ways intensive, but it solves a problem and we're here to find better solutions.
And you're in the hands of a psychotherapist, which is like a bonus, it's amazing.
Exactly.
Well-
With people having mental issues, they're
Well-
like, yeah.
That's really good work. I love it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So it's disability pride. I have a question for you about disability pride. What does disability pride mean to you?
This is always an interesting question to me because I am a firm believer that there's a feeling that we are all in the act of becoming. And because we are all in the act of becoming, disability pride to me is something that is a sort of a constant evolution. And I think it's being able to embrace the notion of how we look at disability in itself. My thesis advisor was a linguist and an anthropologist, a French anthropologist, and he studied language and the etymology, the origins of. So we always had this conversation when I was a graduate student of what is this word disability? And everyone tries to change it in different ways. And I think sometimes when we've talked about this notion of how do we reclaim disability as a word, as an idea, as a concept. And so for me, disability pride has always been about this sort of constant evolution, watching people and how they're reclaiming in different ways. And I'm always excited because I'm in the sandwich. I knew people who were part of the early disability civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s. I knew them later in their lives. And I know people now who are coming up and using social media and using technology and becoming influencers in different ways and saying, what is disability? And seeing that evolution of what disability pride is. So I never have a definitive answer because I always think it is this act of becoming. What I am really embracing is the notion that, yes, I have a disability and I'm proud of the person I am becoming. With a disability, understanding that it is a part of who I am. It's not all of me, but it makes me who I am, and I see the world through this lens. And happy to see it.
Disability pride is an act of becoming. I like that a lot. Super beautiful. I think that you said that very eloquently, and I love that. I do think this is a fluid process for sure. Thank you for sharing that. I think disability pride is an interesting month because I think we as disabled people are trying to figure out what that means in the moment, like you're saying. And the world is also grappling with what that means for them and understanding why we would be prideful. So I think it's an interesting moment in the year to do some reflection on it. Okay, so before we wrap up, we're going to leave all of your information, first of all and foremost, in the show notes and clickable links where our community can follow you and learn from you and hire you and work with you and all of those good things. Whoever's not following you needs to, because you're constantly putting out very, very insightful, amazing information. And I thoroughly enjoy it. Okay. Did we miss anything before I surprise you with push for a moment?
I don't think so. I don't know.
I think this is a really incredible conversation. You're very interesting. I love it. Okay, so pushing forward moment. Do you have something, a little like mantra quote? You've already given us quite a few beautiful quotes that I love. But like when you live by that kind of keeps you pushing forward.
And this was a book that was given to me. It was written in 1928. And it was booked by a literary critic. And the book is called The Wound and the Bow. And one of the things that was really interesting for me is that this has been the mantra of my life. I will make my wound into my bow. It means my wound is my disability, but I will make it into something that is powerful, like a bow, that I will make it into something that I can launch things with, that I can launch myself, that I can launch ideas, that could be something that is powerful unto oneself and turn something that is seen as a negative into a positive. And that is the mantra in which I have lived, which I have encapsulated my life, because I always am pushing. And I'm grateful that I have two type A New York City parents who pushed me, who never saw, yes, I had a disability, but so what can you do? Not what you can't do. What can you do? And let's find out. And not lean in with fear. And this is where the wound and the bow sort of plays into it, but lean in with curiosity. And that is how I live my life, is I lean in with curiosity. I don't want to be fearful of anything. Now, there are days where it's, okay, I need a moment, take a beat. But ultimately, it's understanding that I'm here and that I'm trying to create that purpose. So the wound and the bow is how I've begun to see my life, live my life in such a...
The Wound and the Bow. I love it. I need to read that book.
Yeah. I have to see if it's in print still.
Gosh, thank you for coming on the show. I'm so excited that we did this. This was a fascinating conversation. And congratulations on just living such a cool and interesting, multi-layered life. I think you're leaving a really lasting impact and a legacy. So congratulations on all the work you're doing. And thank you for your time, Jonathan.
Thank you, Alycia. I so appreciate it.
Thank you to our community for showing up again for another episode of Pushing Forward with Alycia. And that is literally how we roll on this podcast. We will see you next time.